Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. Now, as Jesus was passing by, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who committed the sin that caused him to be born blind, this man or his parents?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but he was born blind so that the acts of God may be revealed through what happens to him. We must perform the deeds of the one who sent me as long as it is daytime. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spat on the ground and made some mud with the saliva. He smeared the mud on the blind man's eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So the blind man went away and washed and came back seeing. Then the neighbors and the people who had seen him previously as a beggar began saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some people said, "This is the man," while others said, "No, but he looks like him." The man himself kept insisting, "I am the one." So they asked him, "How then were you made to see?" He replied, "The man called Jesus made mud, smeared it on my eyes, and told me, 'Go to Siloam and washed.' So I went and washed, and was able to see." They said to him, "Where is that man?" He replied, "I don't know." They brought the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees. Now the day on which Jesus made the mud and caused him to see was a Sabbath. So the Pharisees asked him again how he gained his sight. He replied, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I am able to see." Then some of the Pharisees began to say, "This man is not from God, because he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such miraculous signs?" Thus there was a division among them. So again they asked the man who used to be blind, "What do you say about him, since he caused you to see?" "He is a prophet," the man replied. Now the Jewish leaders refused to believe that he had really been blind and had gained his sight until at last they summoned the parents of the man who had become able to see. They asked the parents, "Is this your son, whom you say was born blind? Then how does he see now?" So his parents replied, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but we do not know how he is now able to see, nor do we know who caused him to see. Ask him. He is a mature adult. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jewish religious leaders, for the Jewish leaders had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. For this reason his parents said, "He is a mature adult. Ask him." Then they summoned the man who used to be blind a second time and said to him, "Promise before God to tell all the truth. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. I do know one thing, that although I was blind, now I can see." Then they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he cause you to see?" He answered, "I told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You people don't want to become his disciples too, do you?" They heaped insults on him, saying, "You are his disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses. We do not know where this man comes from." The man replied, "This is a remarkable thing that you don't know where he comes from, and yet he caused me to see. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is devout and does his will, God listens to him. Never before has anyone heard of someone causing a man born blind to see. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They replied, "You were born completely in sinfulness, and yet you presume to teach us?" So they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, so he found the man and said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man replied, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus told him, "You have seen him. He is the one speaking with you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that those who do not see may gain their sight, and the ones who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and asked him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus replied, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now, because you claim that you can see, your guilt remains." Yeah. So after the bit in the temple where Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am," um, here you have Jesus on the Sabbath, as he's passing by, sees this man who was blind from birth, and he makes some mud and rubs it on the man's eyes, and he goes and washes, and he can see again. And then you just have this interrogation by the Pharisees of this man here, and they're like, "Who did this to you? Who caused you to see? How did he cause you to see?" And they're trying to find some way to get out of the fact that this man was blind, but now he sees by the actions of Jesus. And they are really struggling with this. And they've already decided beforehand that if anyone is to confess that Jesus is the Christ, then he's going to be kicked out of the synagogue. And so they summon this man's parents to come in as well. And they're like, "Well, I don't know. He's a grown adult. You ask him." And the blind man eventually just lets them have it and says that, "We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is devout and does his will, God listens to him. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." And they end with, "You were born completely in sinfulness, and yet you presume to teach us?" And they throw him out. It's interesting that from that, they claim that they were not born completely in sinfulness. And I wonder if this is some of the initial question here. So you have Jesus' disciples asking in verse 2, "Rabbi, who committed the sin that caused him to be born blind, this man or his parents?" And Jesus replies, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but he was born blind so that the acts of God may be revealed through what happens to him." And you have this closing here where the Jewish leaders say, "You were born completely in sinfulness." I wonder if, in their case, they're presuming that since this man was born blind, that he was born in complete sin. Yet Jesus disagrees with this notion that his blindness was punitive for sin committed. Yeah, and also you have what Jesus ends with here. "For judgment," in verse 39, "I have come into this world so that those who do not see may gain their sight, and the ones who see may become blind." And the Pharisees reply, "We are not blind too, are we?" And Jesus replied, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now because you claim that you can see, your guilt remains." Yeah. The Pharisees were blind guides. They professed to be able to see, that is, to know God and to discern his will for people's lives. But in actuality, they couldn't. But as it was, they claimed that they could, and claimed authority to do so. So there's a greater guilt on them, because not only could they not see, but they claimed that they could see and were leading people into iniquity. Let's see what Guzik has to say. The previous chapter, ending as Jesus passed by those who wanted to stone him, considering Jesus guilty of blasphemy, John continues this account, noting now Jesus passed by a man who was blind from birth. The sense of the flow of the text is that Jesus was not shaken or disturbed by the almost deadly confrontation with the religious leaders that just happened. We find him calm and self-possessed, acting with a profound disregard of his enemies and their hatred. Jesus was often reviled, but never ruffled. One of the things worthy to be noticed in our Lord's character is his wonderful quiet of spirit, especially his marvelous calmness in the presence of those who misjudged and insulted and slandered him, from Spurgeon. The blind man was sitting, begging, possibly proclaiming the fact of his having been so born, for otherwise the disciples could hardly have asked the following question, from Alfred. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The disciples regarded this man as an unsolved riddle. They showed no interest in helping the man, but in discussing the cause for his condition. Jesus will soon show a different way. He won't dwell on the theological puzzle, but on actually helping the man. It is ours not to speculate, but to perform acts of mercy and love, according to the tenor of the gospel. Let us then be less inquisitive and more practical, less for cracking doctrinal nuts, and more for bringing forth the bread of life to the starving multitudes, from Spurgeon. We often suspect that where there is a more than ordinary sufferer, there is a more than ordinary sinner. The disciples believed this so much that they wondered if this man had actually sinned before he was born, causing his blind condition. In their thinking about divine retribution, they had not advanced far beyond the position of Job's friends, from Bruce. It was widely held that suffering, and especially such a disaster as blindness, was due to sin. The general principle was laid down by Rabbi Emi: there is no death without sin, and there is no suffering without iniquity, from Morris. Yeah. And this isn't the first time that you have such a connection being made. Because also you have this incident with a tower that fell on people, and an incident where Herod slew some Galileans. And those were also presumed to be because of the sinfulness of the people, of the victims. But Jesus disputes this notion. Dodd suggested 5 possible reasons behind their question. Some of the Jews of that time believed in the preexistence of souls and the possibility that those preexistent souls could sin. Some of the Jews at that time believed in some kind of reincarnation, and perhaps a man sinned in a previous existence. Some of the Jews at that time believed that a baby might sin in the womb. They thought the punishment was for a sin the man would later commit, or they were so bewildered that they threw out a wild possibility without thinking it through. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. First, Jesus said the man's blindness, essentially a birth defect, was not caused by some specific sin on the part of the man or his parents. Birth defects and other such tragedies are sometimes due to sinful behavior of the parents. Yet far more often, and in the case Jesus spoke of here, it is due simply to sin and our fallen condition in general, not due to any specific sin. The sin of Adam set the principle of death and its associated destruction in the world, and we have had to deal with it ever since. But that the works of God should be revealed in him. Speaking to this man's situation, Jesus told them that even his blindness was in the plan of God, so that the works of God should be revealed in him. Think of all the times the little blind boy asked his mother, "Why am I blind?" Perhaps she never felt she had a good answer. Jesus explained, "It is because God wants to work in and through even this." Jesus pointed the question away from why, and onto the idea, what can God do in this? In this man's case, the specific work of God would soon be revealed to heal him of his blindness. God may reveal his works in other lives, other ways, such as joy and endurance in the midst of the difficulty. In the economy of God's providence, his suffering had its place and aim, and this was to bring out the works of God in his being healed by the Redeemer. From Alfred. Evil furthers the work of God in the world. It is in conquering and abolishing evil that he is manifested. The question for us is not where suffering has come from, but what are we to do with it, from Dodds. Yeah. And of course, that is not to say that we should sin all the more so that grace would abound. Rather, we should um, do the works of God and love and serve Him. This does not mean that God deliberately caused the child to be born blind in order that, after many years, His glory should be displayed in the removal of the blindness. To think so would again be aspersion on the character of God. It does mean that God overruled the disaster of the child's blindness, so that when the child grew to manhood, he might, by the recovering of his sight, see the glory of God in the face of Christ, and others, seeing the work of God, might turn to the true light of the world. From Bruce. We must suppose that every sufferer will, in the long run, be made aware of his share in promoting that advance, though today he suffered blindly, little conscious of his privilege. From Trench. I must work the works of Him who sent me while it is day. Instead of focusing on the man as a theology problem, Jesus saw him as an opportunity to work the works of God. Jesus sensed the urgency to do this while it was still day, the time of His earthly ministry. I must work is a marvelous statement of Jesus. The worker is a well-earned title to the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the worker, the chief worker, and the example to all workers. From Spurgeon. He worked under the limitations of mortality and recognized in the brevity of life another call to eager and continuous service. From Maclaren. When you see a man in sorrow and trouble, the way to look at it is not to blame him and inquire how he came there, but to say, here's an opening for God's almighty love. Here's an occasion for the display of the grace and goodness of the Lord. From Spurgeon. The night is coming when no one can work. Jesus understood that opportunities for service and doing good don't last forever. Jesus knew that healing this man on the Sabbath would bring greater opposition from the religious leaders, who already wanted to silence and kill him. Yet his compassion for the man drove him to do it anyway. Our Lord, as a man here on earth, had a day. It was only a day, a short period, and not very long. He could not make it longer, for it was settled by the great Lord. From Spurgeon. He spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva. Jesus used what was undoubtedly one of his more unusual methods, leading to a miracle. We can suppose that Jesus wanted to emphasize at least two things. Just as God used the dust of the ground and clay to do a work of creation in Genesis, so Jesus did a work of creation with dust and clay for this man. Jesus found it important to change his methods of healing, so no one could ever make a formula of the methods. The power was in God, not in a method. This emphasis of John seems to be on compassion rather than creation. The touch of a friendly hand would be reassuring. The weight of the clay would serve as an indicator to the blind man that something had been done to him, and it would be an inducement to obey Jesus' command. From Tenney. In his ministry to the souls of men, Jesus adopted no stereotyped approach. He dealt with each man as his particular need required. From Morris. Several commentators note that what seems so strange to us, using saliva as a medicine upon the eyes, was not so strange in the ancient world. Spittle, and especially the spittle of some distinguished persons, was believed to possess certain curative qualities. From Barclay. Mark recorded 2 other healings that Jesus performed with the use of his saliva. Go wash in the pool of Siloam. In this miracle, Jesus took all the initiative. Jesus came to the blind man did not come to him. Even so, he expected the blind man to respond with faith-filled action. The healing would not happen unless the man responded with those faith-filled, obedient actions. Not many people would appreciate having mud made with spit rubbed in their eyes. Some would look at how Jesus did this miracle and object, saying that it was offensive, inadequate, or even harmful to rub mud made with spit in a man's eyes. In the same way, some feel that the gospel is offensive. It is true that it offends man's pride and human wisdom, but it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. In the same way, some people feel that the gospel is inadequate, but have all the psychiatric and political and social programs in the world done more good than that life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ? In the same way, some feel that the gospel is harmful, that the free offer of grace in Jesus will cause people to sin, that grace may abound. But the gospel changes our life for the good and the pure, not unto wickedness. The water for the pool of Siloam came through Hezekiah's tunnel, a remarkable engineering feat built in Old Testament times. It was called Siloam, which it was said meant sent, because the water in it had been sent through the conduit into the city from Barclay. And interesting note concerning that. I think they dug that tunnel from both sides and met in the middle, which was indeed remarkable. It was from the Siloam stream that was drawn the water which was poured over the great altar at the Feast of Tabernacles just past, which pouring out was regarded by the rabbis, and is still, as typical of the pouring out of the Spirit in the latter days, from Trench. Which is translated sent. Again and again, John refers to Jesus as having been sent by the Father. So now blindness is removed with reference to, and with the aid of, the sent. From Morris. So he went and washed. This took faith, even when Jesus did not even promise the blind man sight in doing this. It was surely implied, but the man acted on faith, even in the implied promise of Jesus. Still, as the blind man, he had to find his way down to the pool of Siloam, and down its steps to the pool itself. He likely could think of a dozen reasons why this was a fool's errand, but he went and washed in faith and obedience, because Jesus told him to, and because there was mud in his eyes. Yeah, but surely he could have found a closer source if all he was looking to do was get rid of the mud in his eyes. And he came back seeing. This is the first time in the biblical record a person born blind was healed of their blindness. From Genesis to John, no prophet, priest, or apostle ever gave sight to eyes born blind. Since healing blind eyes is the work of the Lord, Yahweh, Jehovah, it shows that Jesus is God. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. From Psalm 146, verse 8. Opening the eyes of the blind was prophesied to be a work of the Messiah. In Isaiah 35:5, the eyes of the blind shall be opened. And they came back seeing. The word rendered received sight is literally recovered sight. Sight being natural to men, the deprivation of it is regarded as a loss, and the reception of it, though never enjoyed before, as a recovery. From Alfred. As the impotent man of chapter 5, cured after his 38 years of sickness, may be viewed as a type of the Jews who are yet to be healed, so may this man of chapter 9, blind from birth, be viewed as a type of the Gentiles, whose healing was about to begin, and who were about to believe into Jesus as him who was sent from God, from Trench. Yeah. From my understanding, only the Messiah was prophesied as healing the eyes of the blind. And this was no small miracle, because this man being blind from birth, it's not just the physical eyes that need to function again, but it's also the neurological connectivity that interprets shapes into a usable signal from the eyes that needs to be healed as well. So it's not only the eyes, but also a portion of the brain that needs to be neurologically treated. So this was no small healing. Others said, "He is like him," or he said, "I am he." It seemed too amazing to believe, but the man convinced them that he was in fact healed from congenital blindness. The transformation in his life was so significant that many found it hard to believe he was the same man. A man called Jesus. At this point, the man knew very little about Jesus. He didn't seem to know that Jesus was from Nazareth, or was the Messiah, or claimed to be God, or the light of the world. He didn't even know where Jesus was. The man seemed to know nothing about Jesus except his name, and that Jesus was the man who healed him. The blind man never even saw Jesus until later in the story. His first dealings with Jesus were while he was still blind, and Jesus was not there when he washed his eyes at the pool of Siloam and could see. So he wouldn't even have recognized him by sight. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Jesus took the initiative in this miracle and could have done it on any day he chose. Jesus chose to do this miracle on the Sabbath to challenge the petty traditions of the religious leaders, traditions that they lifted to the place of binding laws. One of the categories of work specifically forbidden on the Sabbath in the tradition in the traditional interpretation of the law, was kneading, and the making of mud or clay with such simple ingredients as earth and saliva was construed as a form of kneading, from Bruce. Works of necessity and mercy never could be forbidden on that day by him whose name is mercy, and whose nature is love. For the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Were it otherwise, the Sabbath would be rather a curse than a blessing, from Clark. Yeah. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." To the Pharisees, Jesus could not be from God, because he did not line up with their traditions and prejudices. This man is contemptuous, that is, this fellow from Tasker. There was a division among them. Instead of uniting everyone, Jesus often divided men. They were divided between those who accepted him and trusted him, and those who did not. In choosing, they took one of two sides regarding Jesus. Jesus is a sinner and should be rejected, or our understanding and application of the Sabbath law is wrong. There was far more evidence for the second proposition than for the first, yet it seems that far more of them adopted the second position. They did this in spite of the evidence, not because of it. The group speaking tentatively in favor of Jesus must have been a small one. We do not hear of them again after this verse, and throughout the rest of the chapter, the narrative proceeds as though the other group were the only one to be considered, from Morris. The minority's question, how can a sinner do such a miraculous sign, sounds much like Nicodemus' opening words to Jesus. No one could perform the miraculous signs you are doing if God were not with him, from John 3:2. What do you say about him because he opened your eyes? Most of the religious leaders had made up their mind about Jesus, saying that he was not of God, yet some disagreed. They thought they would get the opinion of the man born blind regarding Jesus. It is a measure of their perplexity and division that they ask the man what he thinks of Jesus. Normally, they would not have dreamed of putting a question on a religious issue to such a man, from Morris. Yeah, that they later then yell at him for telling them what he thought. This being despite the fact that they asked him what he thought is strange and shows their bias in this situation. He is a prophet. Jesus did not specifically say to this man that he would be healed if he washed in the pool of Siloam, but it was implied in the action. Though Jesus was not present when the man actually gained his sight, one could say that Jesus prophesied that he would gain his sight if he did what Jesus told him to do. In John 9, verse 11, all the man knew about Jesus was his name. Here the healed man proclaimed that Jesus was a prophet. He grew in his understanding and proclamation about Jesus. Now, according to a Jewish maxim, a prophet might dispense with the observation of the Sabbath. See Grotius. If they allow that Jesus was a prophet, then even in their sense he might break the law of the Sabbath and be guiltless, from Clark. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind. It was easier for the religious leaders to believe that the man was never really blind than to believe that Jesus healed the man. Unable to explain this unprecedented phenomena of a man born blind being enabled to see, they will not admit that it has really happened, from Tasker. Yeah, and I think this shows too our capacity to induce additional skepticism so that we don't have to believe anything else. We can always grow more skeptical and reject anything that we don't like if we don't have a consistent epistemology, that is, a method for determining the truth. Is this your son, who you say was born blind? The religious leaders asked the parents to verify that the man was truly born blind. The tone of their question implies that they wondered if the parents were part of the same imagined conspiracy. Yet the parents verified, "This is our son," and that he was born blind. This should have persuaded the religious leaders. I mean, you have the evidence of the witness of 2 or 3 witnesses here, that a remarkable man from God was in their midst. It did not persuade them, and they continued their hostile interrogation. By what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. The parents could identify their son, and that he was born blind. They would not speak to the question of how he was healed because of the threat of excommunication. Yeah. Ezra 10:8 is an Old Testament example of excommunication. Dodds wrote of the practice in the ancient Jewish world. Of excommunication, there were 3 degrees. The first lasted for 30 days. Then followed a second admonition, and if impenitent, the culprit was punished for 30 days more, and if still impenitent, he was laid under the cherem, or ban, which was of indefinite duration, and which entirely cut him off from intercourse with others. He was treated as if he were a leper, from Dodds. Many of the rulers in Jerusalem really believed in Jesus, but were afraid to say it, because they didn't want to be cast out of the synagogue. In the modern Western world, the idea of excommunication means little, because it is easy for the excommunicated, one, to simply go to another church and pretend that nothing happened. More common today is what one might call self-excommunication, where believers separate themselves from church worship and life with no good reason. He is of age, ask him. It is instinctive and normal for parents to protect their children, even when their children are adults. The parents were so frightened by the threat of excommunication that they did all they could to put the attention back upon their son and away from them. It is plain that they discerned danger and had no intention of being caught up in it with their son, from Morris. They emphatically turned the focus back upon their son. The pronouns in the latter part of the verse are emphatic. Who hath opened his eyes, we know not. Ask him. He is of age. He shall speak for himself. From Alfred. Yeah, a clear distinction between us and him. Give God the glory. This command to be healed, to the healed man, may be an admonition to tell the truth, or it may be a command to deny any credit to Jesus in the healing. The words are a form of an adjuration, to tell the truth. Remember that you are in God's presence and speak as unto him, from Alfred. This man is being told that he has not been completely frank up till now. He has held back something which should show Jesus to be a sinner, from Morris. We know this man is a sinner. They said this not because Jesus broke the law of God in the Hebrew Scriptures. They said this because Jesus did not obey their man-made traditions around the law. They said this despite the evidence, not because of it. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. The man born blind didn't know everything about Jesus, but he did know how Jesus had touched his life. At that moment, it was an irrefutable argument. They could not argue against what Jesus did in this man's life. They take their stand on their preconceived ideas, he on the simple facts that he knows, from Morris. It was frustrating for his interrogators that neither of these statements could be refuted. The former statement was confirmed by the evidence of the parents. The truth of the latter they could see for themselves. Why not admit the conclusion to which these two facts pointed, from Bruce? Yeah. The only thing that it points to is that the interrogator has a reason in and of himself that he will not accept the facts in front of him. From time to time, Christians are confronted with questions meant to embarrass or mock, questions about some science or social issue or another. One doesn't have to be an expert in all those things, though the more one knows, the better. More than anything, we may simply say, I don't know about all that, but this I do know. Once I was blind, now I see. We don't base our faith on our personal experience. We base it upon God's truth, revealed to us in the Bible. Yet our experience of God's work in our life is an important and persuasive additional support for our faith and the faith of others. To be able to truly claim, though I was blind, now I see, is a powerful argument. Yeah, it's not as though any other worldview or religion can profess such. They said to him again, at least not honestly. The tone implies a harsh, intense interrogation. They demanded answers from this man who could now see. I told you already, and you did not listen. The man born blind showed a simple and profound wisdom in his back and forth with the esteemed and educated religious leaders. If they kept asking the same question, they would keep hearing the same answer. As the mercy of God had given him his sight, so the wisdom of God taught him how to escape the snares laid for his ruin. From Clark. Do you also want to become his disciples? Intending it to or not, the healed man mocked both their prejudiced rejection of Jesus and proclaimed himself to be a disciple of Jesus. That is, do you also? He now displays a hitherto unsuspected capacity for ironical repertoire. From Bruce. The man did not really expect that these men who were so plainly opposed to Jesus were changing their minds, but he was quite ready to bait them. From Morris. We know God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. The religious leaders could not keep from displaying their own proud arrogance and their prejudiced contempt of Jesus. Why, this is a marvelous thing. The healed man said this about their unbelief, not about the miracles of Jesus. It was as if he told the religious leaders, your unbelief and ignorance in the face of the evidence is more of a miracle than my cure. That you do not know where he is from. His ye is emphatic and may carry some sly irony. You, the religious experts, cannot work out a simple thing like this. From Morris. We know that God does not hear sinners. Isaiah 1:15, which says, and when you spread forth your hands, I will hide mine eyes from you. Yes, when you make many prayers, I will not hear you. Your hands are full of blood. And Psalm 66:18, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. Are passages that say God is not obligated to hear the prayer of a sinner. With knowledge of the scripture and valid application, the simple man born blind proved that their claim, we know that this man is a sinner, was false. As a well-brought-up Jew, the man regards it as axiomatic that a miracle wrought in answer to prayer is proof that its worker is no sinner. No divine help is available for impenitent sinners. From Tasker. This man's statement was in one sense true, and in another sense false. God is certainly under no obligation to hear the prayer of the man or woman in rebellion against him, yet in his mercy, and for his ultimate wise purpose, he may hear the unrepentant sinner. Yet the man's statement was completely true in this sense. If Christ had been an impostor, it is not possible to conceive that God would have listened to his prayer, and given him the power to open the blind man's eyes. From Spurgeon. You were completely born in sins, and you are teaching us. These religious leaders despised the common people, and this man in particular. They were especially angry because he was right and they were wrong. And they cast him out. The excommunication of the blind man, difficult as it was, turned out to be a good thing, because he would shortly be far more connected to Jesus. The casting out of this man meant his excommunication from his religious rites in the temple and synagogue. From Morgan. The religious leaders treated this man terribly. They abused him, they insulted him, and they rejected him. They have had since many followers in their crimes. A false religion supported by the state has by fire and sword silenced those whose truth in the end annihilated the system of their opponents. From Clark. When he had found him, the religious leaders rejected the man whom Jesus healed. Jesus then made it a point to meet him and receive him. It hurts to be rejected by others, but God has consolation for us in Jesus Christ. If he finds and receives, what does it matter who rejects? From Morgan. He that enjoys the favor of the Son of God will not tremble at the frown of the Sanhedrin. From Spurgeon. Do you believe in the Son of God? Jesus called on the healed man to fully believe, and he did. Lord, I believe. When the healed man declared his loyalty to Jesus by not denying him before the hostile religious leaders, he was rewarded when Jesus revealed more of himself to him. You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. The question, do you believe in the Son of Man, is a summons to commitment. The Greek pronoun you, used with the verb, makes the inquiry doubly emphatic. It demanded a personal decision in the face of opposition or rejection. From Tenney. Yeah, we have seen what all of these have said about me. What do you say? Jesus dealt with this man differently than most. He met his physical need first, then allowed him to endure persecution, then called him to a specific belief. It's good to remember that God may work differently in different lives. Some manuscripts have the Son of Man instead of Son of God. Both terms point to God's Messiah, the one who should be believed and trusted. And he worshipped him. The religious leaders said, "You can't worship with us at the temple." Jesus said, "I will receive your worship." When the man worshipped Jesus, Jesus received the worship. This is something that no man or angel in the Bible does. In fact, they blatantly say, if they're not to receive worship, then don't worship me. The fact that Jesus accepted the worship is another proof that Jesus was and is God, and that he knew himself to be God. For judgment I have come into this world. John recorded these words of Jesus as part of a larger theme in his gospel. The men were divided over Jesus, with some accepting and some rejecting. This is one way Jesus brought judgment into this world, by being a dividing line. In this sense, Jesus is like the Continental Divide in the Rocky Mountains, a single place where an entire path is decided. Jesus is the pivot on which human destiny turns, from Tenney. His statement that he had come to judge the world meant that he would be the separating one, the one through whom God would judge, from Morgan. That those who do not see may see. Those who admit their spiritual blindness can find sight in Jesus. But those who see may be made blind. That is, those who falsely claim to have spiritual sight will be made blind. They which see not, they who have no spiritual vision, are conscious of their need of it. And they which see means they who wrongly suppose that they already possess spiritual vision, from Tasker. Those who do not see may see. Those who are conscious of their blindness and grieved on account of it may be relieved, while those who are content with the light they have lose even that, from Dodds. We ought not to suffer any person to perish for lack of not knowing the gospel. We cannot give men eyes, but we can give them light, from Spurgeon. In saying those who do not see, Jesus used blindness in a spiritual metaphorical sense, of those who cannot see the light and truth of God, especially as it is revealed in Jesus Christ. One may say that this entire chapter paints a picture of how Jesus heals blind souls. Are we blind also? The Pharisees sneered at Jesus, confident in their own spiritual sight, which was blindness, because they could not see the Son of God right in front of them. Yeah, here you have God in the flesh in front of them, and rather than worship him, as this previously blind man rightly does, they sneer at him. From Spurgeon here, take a homely illustration from myself. I used to be very backward in using spectacles for some time, because I could almost see without them, and I did not wish to be an old gentleman too soon. But now that I cannot read my notes at all without wearing spectacles, I put them on without a moment's hesitation, and I do not care whether you think me old or not. So when a man comes to feel thoroughly guilty, he does not mind depending upon God. If you were blind, you would have no sin. If the Pharisees would admit to their spiritual blindness, they could be forgiven and set free. But because they say, "We see," their sin remains. There is a great difference between the one who is blind and knows it, and to the one who simply shuts his eyes. To be so self-deceived as to shut one's eyes to the light is a desperate state to be in. The light is there, but if people refuse to avail themselves of it, but rather deliberately reject it, how then can they be enlightened? As Jesus said, their sin remains. From Bruce. Yeah. And I think it's important too that we realize the state that we're in. In Romans 3:23 it says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." And elsewhere it says, "There is none righteous, no, not one." When we say that we're without sin, we make God out to be a liar, and the truth isn't in us. So it's important that we recognize the state that we're in, our need for a Savior, our need for someone who can right this gap between us and God. Because God, being perfectly just and holy, must punish all sins. So, we need to turn to the one who paid the due penalty for our sins for us and accept what he did on our behalf. That is Jesus Christ. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.